Alright, hi everybody. Here's our Chapter 10 video. We're talking about marketing research and marketing intelligence, which is a pretty fun chapter here. The first slide here talks about the difference between marketing research and marketing intelligence. And one of the main differences, marketing research is designed to answer a specific question. So, we collect and analyze data, but again, we're answering a specific question. Whereas marketing intelligence is gathering information on just a general basis on what your competitors are up to and what's going on in the environment. So that you would just kind of collect on an ongoing basis. The research you would conduct to answer a specific question. Let's talk about marketing research first. Here's a list of all the things it can help you do, and it's a lot. I'm not going to go over all of them, but all these kinds of things, from pricing decisions to identifying your market, all these types of things are some of the specific questions that marketing research can help you answer. It's really all about understanding your customers, creating value for them, and building relationships. And so all of these things fall into one of those categories, but that's what we're out to. I mean, we are out to improve the bottom line, but the way to improve the bottom line is to understand the customers, create value, and build relationships. And that really should be a theme that you're picking up throughout the entire course. How much information? So a lot of this is, sometimes we find out what customers want and need, but we don't have the resources to provide that, or it doesn't fit in with our goal. So you'll gather a lot of information on this. You might not be able to use all of it because sometimes what our customers want is not something that we can provide and still make a profit. So you'll have to constantly try to balance this. This is a slide that kind of shows the overall process here. So you're going to assess what you need to get, and so this is for a marketing information system. You'll get information from lots of different places, from marketing research, which we'll talk about, marketing intelligence, and then internal information you have, like those customer resource databases we talked about. We'll gather information on all these different aspects of the environment, and then we have to use the information. Analyzing and using it, it needs to be useful information. So things that we can act on, things that we can, groups that we can identify. So you don't want to fall into the rut of gathering so much information that it's not useful, and then you get kind of lost in that. So let's talk about developing that information. We said there's 3 different things. Internal databases, so these would be things like sales records that we've kept, inventory things. It could be our accounting information, all these types of things. It could be surveys that we've done of our customers, those customer resource management things that we've done, which would kind of tie into the sales records. So all of those would be internal things, which actually can answer a lot of information about understanding our customers. Marketing intelligence is the next one, and this is, again, an external thing. Information on our competition or the environment. And we'll talk a little bit about that because there's a lot of different sources of that. And then marketing research will be new information that we need to go out and get. And again, this is to answer a specific question. Some types of internally generated, so this would be the internal thing. All kinds of things here. Clickstream is information from who visits your websites and where it comes from. Internal web type thing. Data mining and data warehousing are big ones, and we increasingly are using data-driven decision making in marketing. So these become important. Data mining is you're filtering, just think of like a gold miner filtering through the stream to try and find little nuggets. That's really what data mining is. A lot of times you don't even know what you're looking for. You're mining around to find relationships that you didn't know existed, which can be tough. But sometimes, yeah, you're just poking around there trying to see what you're going to find. But all of these information things, and then there's more and more software to help manage all this data and use it. There's lots of books out there now, but data-driven marketing is really becoming much more prevalent and much more important. You know, it's kind of hard now just to guess what people want, and so when other people are doing it much more scientifically. So marketing intelligence, we collect marketing intelligence data, and then sometimes we get an idea from this and we can test it over in marketing research. We can gather it from scanning public things like newspapers and trade journals and that kind of stuff, or by looking at economic data that's already produced by the government. The BEA has a lot of stuff. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has a ton of stuff. We can go to our competitor's website and see what's going on, or social networks, not just our social network, but what's going on with theirs. And so this is a very common practice, and it's very important to know what your competitors do as well. Then you get into things like industrial espionage, which is not unusual. Some of it is illegal and some of it's not. Former and current employees, contract, you usually have like a non-disclosure contract, so you can't hire somebody from another company. It can go too far, and if you get caught with this kind of stuff, it can be very negative. There was an example a few years ago, it's probably more than a few now, but a bunch of companies got in the mail, they didn't go looking for this, they just received it in the mail, a sample of something one of their competitors was working on. And it turns out it was a disgruntled employee who I guess got fired or didn't feel he was appreciated. And so he took something that they were developing and sent it to 3 of their major competitors. I'm going to say it was 3M. Somebody was not happy at 3M. So they took something they were developing and sent it. I could be wrong about it. But anyway, the 3 companies each did something different. One company said, well, I didn't ask for this, but now that it's here, and so they took it to the lab and started testing it. The second company said, I don't know, I'm just going to throw this away. I don't want to get caught with this. And the third company actually reported it to some federal agency, whoever's in charge of that. And it turns out the guy got arrested, and the company that did the testing on it got in trouble for copyright violation or patent infringement, because even though they didn't ask for it, they're not allowed to go and test it like that. So you have to be careful with this, and so it's even worse if you're going out and seeking this information. But even if it just comes to you, you can't use it. So the guy that threw it away didn't get in trouble, but the company that did, I think it was Johnson & Johnson, was the one that actually took it and started testing on it, and they got in a good bit of trouble for that. So you do need to be careful with the marketing intelligence when you're going off stuff that's not just publicly available. Is marketing research always correct? And no, the answer is not. A lot of good ideas have been rejected. Some things like New Coke that tested really, really well went out and flubbed, and it's not always it's not always correct. I mean, we have to start somewhere, but we have to understand that it's not going to be foolproof. When I worked at the bank, we had all these different cards that we were testing, credit cards, and we had a focus group. And we were, at the time, everybody had like a bunch of credit cards, and so we were trying to make ours the one you used. So we had this focus group, and this we had this woman in there, and we described this card. Well, what if you had a card that gave you points for this and had this feature and that feature? And she was like, I would definitely, if I had that card, that would be the one, my go-to card that I would use all the time. And she was very adamant about it. And the fact is, she actually had that card in her wallet and had never used it. So sometimes, you know, when you're doing this, you can't quite believe what people are. Sometimes people tell you what they think you want to hear rather than the truth. So something to keep in mind. But this is an overview of the marketing research process. So again, we've moved from marketing intelligence to marketing research, and we're going to talk about each of these 7 steps, and you'll see I will actually add number 8 to this process. But let's talk about each one of these. The first one is to define the problem, which sounds easy, but this is actually the hardest part. For one thing, you want to make sure you're defining the problem and not the symptoms. If you say sales are declining, that's not the problem. The problem, that's a symptom that something else is wrong. What you need to find out is why the sales are declining. So make it, and you can do research on anything, but if you haven't defined the problem right, then your whole research isn't really answering what you need it to answer. It's going to give you some stuff, but that's not really what, and that would mean a lot of wasted dollars here. And so it sounds like this is, again, we're looking at a specific problem here, a specific question or a specific problem that we're trying to solve. And this is really critical. If you mess this up, then the whole rest of the process is just a waste of time and money. So try to get to the actual problem, not the symptom. The second step is to design your research. And so, where am I? Oh, okay. Second step, designing the research. This outlines what data we're going to get, from whom we're going to get it, how we're going to collect it, what we're going to do with it once we get it. And so we have two main things here, primary data and secondary data. Primary data is stuff that already, so let me start with secondary. Secondary data already exists. So it could be government information, it could be trade journals, it could be stuff that you did for another purpose, it could be Census Bureau information. And so if this exists, this is going to be much cheaper, and it's also going to be much faster because it already exists. So if you can use secondary data, you want to, but this is stuff that's already out there, collected by your firm or somebody else. The drawback is it might not be specific enough to answer your question, or it was gathered for another purpose, and so it might not quite match your purpose. So if secondary data does not exist to answer your question, then you go to primary data, which means you are going to collect it. And so you're going to go out there and do the surveys or questionnaires or something like that. And again, it's going to be fairly specific to a specific problem or question. Types of research, exploratory research. Sometimes I don't know what the problem is, and so I do exploratory research to try to do this, and I would do this before I go on. And then that would point me in the direction I want to go. Descriptive research. So this might be why are sales going down or declining? Or, maybe I can't tell, so I have to do some exploratory research, maybe with some questionnaires first, before I can figure that out. Descriptive research. Let's say I'm trying to describe my target market or my typical customer. I need to learn a little bit more information about this group of people. That would be descriptive research. And causal research looks at cause and effects research. So for instance, let's say if I drop my price, how much will sales increase? So maybe I'm going to just drop it in one region first before I drop it everywhere. Or it could be the opposite. If I raise my price, what happens to sales? And so we're going to do something and then see what happens. So these would be the three main designs of the research. How we get this information. Observational is great for exploratory research. This is also really good when people can't or won't tell you what they're thinking. So when people can't or won't tell you what they're thinking. You can't just ask them for whatever reason. So this is used, for instance, if you're testing toys on toddlers. They can't articulate what they're doing. You put a bunch of toddlers in a room, you put the toys, and you see what they do with it. You observe it. Sometimes I'm measuring people's eye tracking patterns there's a video in this chapter with that one that's really interesting. Measuring how they look at the website. They probably couldn't even tell you that type of thing. Or sometimes it's sensitive information that they don't, or that they're not even aware of, so they can't tell you. So I observe it. Surveys are often used for, now these aren't exclusive, surveys are used for descriptive and observational is used for exploratory, but it is a common one for that one. So a survey is, perhaps a questionnaire is really the most common one in there. where I can just ask them about their preferences or how much they know about certain things. I just come right out in there. And then experimental research is generally associated with the cause and effect thing. And a lot of times what I do is treat one segment differently and see what happens. So I have a test group or one region, and I do something different. I change the price, or I change the flavor, I change the packaging or the ads or something like that, and see what happens to that group. So that's that cause and effect one there. Let's see. The research instruments that I might use, questionnaires are the most common, and they're very flexible. They're also inexpensive, which is nice. Then there's mechanical instruments for that I'll use a lot in the observational, where I measure physical responses or what people are watching, the neuromarketing. There's several links to videos on the neuromarketing and physical responses that are really, really very interesting. So if you have time, I recommend you watch those, because that stuff's pretty interesting. So so now I've decided what question I'm trying to answer and who I'm going to ask and how I'm going to get it. The next thing then is to actually design your data collection form. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but designing a questionnaire, it doesn't have to be a questionnaire, but these are this is primarily about questionnaires. Designing it is much, much harder than it looks. Designing a good questionnaire is much, much harder than it looks. Your language, unbiased and neutral, words that people can understand. So you don't want a lot of jargon or a lot of acronyms or that kind of stuff. You need to avoid double-barreled questions. You want to avoid that, because you're asking two questions at once, and then people can't, when they answer you, which one are they answering? You don't really know. But the questions need to be clear. You have to be very careful with how you ask sensitive questions, especially like income, things like that. How they're worded so that they don't lead people in a certain direction. Because again, a lot of times people answer these the way what they think you want to hear. So you have to be very careful, very neutral in the way you phrase them, so that you're not leading people to a certain thing. And sometimes you don't even realize you're doing that. Then you really want to test the questionnaire. Open-ended questions can give you a lot more information, but they're much harder to tabulate than just when somebody's checking a box. So it's really that's why the testing is important, because it's actually much more difficult than you would think to write a good questionnaire that tells you what you really want to know without leading people in a certain direction. Okay, so specify the sample. The sample is the people that you're going to ask. So it could be a subset, and you want a nice random sample of your potential buyers or your target market, and it needs to be representative. So if your market is people of all different incomes, and you want the sample to represent the same group of incomes, not just one part of it there. Sampling error is any type of marketing research mistake that results because the sample wasn't representative. So we tested 5% of our target market, and it said conclusively that this was going to happen, but then when we rolled it out, it was the exact opposite, which means that 5% wasn't a good representative sample of your population. So there's a lot of statistics in here to get this right, and how to use the data and how to get a nice sample. So, but getting the right sample is very important, because otherwise, what you're doing here is not going to be a good predictor. Then we got to collect the data. So face-to-face data is helpful. You're going to get a much higher response rate. It is expensive, but if you're asking people questions as they leave the store, depending on what you're doing, that can be, and you can have little you've probably seen this too, where somebody's standing as you leave Best Buy, and they got a little iPad and they're asking questions. But it is expensive because it's a one-on-one thing. However, you have a good response rate because it's much harder to say no to somebody who's right there. Phone, it can even be completely automated, but again, you're going to have a lower response rate. Same with mail. So these guys here are going to have a lower response rate because people filter out their calls or don't answer the mail. Response. And then email and web. This is increasingly used for a lot of things because it's quick and it's inexpensive. And so and you can do more than just surveys. I think most of us think of the web for surveys, but you can do a lot of different things. I'm not going to go over all of these, but these are some things to think of, whichever one you're doing. And making sure your people are trained so that you're getting objective answers. Mailing out questionnaires, again, low response rates, that kind of thing. And again, let's talk about the web, because it's so fast and it's so cheap, and you can actually do a lot of things that you probably didn't think you can. So you can do internet surveys like questionnaires. You can do online focus groups for some observation. You can do for the causal, you can do web-based experiments. I change the website for these people and see what happens. And you can track online behavior, and so that'll be your observational over here. So you can actually do all the types that we talked about online, as well as face-to-face and web and mail and that kind of thing. So step 6 is to analyze the data. Once it's all collected, we remove duplicate things, clean it up. We have all kinds of statistical programs to help tabulate and calculate that, and use those to build models and predict behavior. We have to test the validity and the reliability of the data. The validity has to do with that the questions answer what they were supposed to answer, which is why if you use secondary data, sometimes it's not as valid. And the reliability is, if I answer that same group, that same question, would I get the same answer? And so a well-designed instrument will give you both validity and reliability. And then the last step that your book has is to write and present the research report. And so they have all these things. Don't forget the recommendations. This is important part that sometimes people leave out. They just, here's a bunch of data, but we really need to write recommendations. And then the last step I'm going to put on here is use what you learned. And what we said at the beginning, you want to understand your customers, you want to create value for your customers, and you want to build relationships with your customers. And this was a list at the beginning we have of all the different things we can use to that we can use this marketing research information for. But all of these again go back to these 3 things. So that's the point of the marketing research. And these are all the different things we can do. But don't forget why we're doing it, and don't forget to use what you learned. The worst thing would be to just spend all this money on this marketing research and then not use it. Now, sometimes not using it means not doing something. Maybe I was going to launch this product and this research says just isn't the right time, or this isn't the right market. And that doesn't mean you haven't used it. But use what you've learned to build your relationships with your customers and continue to create value for them. Okay, so there's chapter 10.